Good afternoon.
Wow,
This is
nice
Michael Harding.
timing. And this is Christina Harding.
And we're here with On the Arts, that show that is dedicated to blowing the lid off of all of these little artistic secrets that we have here in southern Utah. We've been really blessed to have artists on here as far as painters and sculptors. Yeah. We've had administrators such as curators of art museums. We've had actors. We've had
entertaining
directors.
actors.
Entertaining
Yes,
actors.
Yeah.
We've had all sorts of folks on. Today is actually a new kind of guest that we have.
Yes.
And I would say an art form that is really nothing less, nothing short of these other genres that we have looked at. And that's actually writing and publishing out there. And we have a special guest here who actually is focused on another aspect that we've looked at, films and film history and such. I think our guest today, Dr. Stephen Armstrong, is going to have some tremendously interesting things to say. No pressure as I throw it across the screen there.
Now. Yeah.
But do we have anything going on this week artistically?
I believe we do. Regarding theater, we have the play Odyssey. This is written by, I believe, someone here in the studio, or I should say an adaptation of that.
That would be moi.
That will be played at Dixie High School. So these high school students will be performing this special show. And I'm excited to see what they come up with, because I'm sure it's known as a devised theater. So there won't be probably not a real set as we're used to seeing in these big musicals, but creative ideas that will come to life on stage. And it's mostly about the words.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, in writing that adaptation, we did it here at Dixie State back in 2012. And I can't remember why I wrote it. I was just depressed one summer or something.
Yeah,
and,
it was therapy for you.
Yeah, I just sat down, and a lot of people who know me as an artist know that I'm very heavily into Shakespearean and Elizabethan drama and theater. So there are a lot of conventions that I'm very fond of and that I'm very interested in. And I also thought, what a wonderful opportunity to take an existing piece of literature, which, of course, how do you get more iconic than Homer's Odyssey? And I decided to tell it through the lens of an Elizabethan playwright. And really had a good time taking a lot of the speeches that Shakespeare had already written and using those structures to tell the story of Odysseus. And had a really great time, and even caused some controversy, I'll tell you. The story of Calypso. Homer, you can have a problem with this if you'd like, but I understand he's not with us anymore, so I don't feel so bad. I've always had a bit of a problem with a Calypso story. I don't like it. And it's always rubbed me the wrong way. And so I decided, this is the controversial part, to rewrite that story. And I wrote it the way I wanted to write it, the way I wanted it to play out.
How dare you?
I'm reading the reaction of our guest across the computer here, and I'm not sure what I'm getting. But I will say I rewrote it, and I had enough reaction from people that I told about what I was doing and why I was doing it, that I decided to make that a part of the piece. And I added the role of the author. And the author is present through the whole thing. The author tells the story of Odysseus. The author speaks to Odysseus. Odysseus speaks to young Athena. The author speaks to young Athena, and vice versa. And it's actually when Tiresias goes down, or not Tiresias, when Odysseus goes down to meet the prophet Tiresias down in Hades, if you will, where I decided to have a little fun with that. The author had lost control of the story. It became Odysseus's story. And Odysseus was praying to the gods to give him guidance, literally at that point praying to the author, and the author just says, it's your story now. And he started to get into not only the mythos of Greek gods and their view of that, but also how we have to take control of our own story and such. And it was right after that Odysseus ended up, after his ship was destroyed by the sirens and such, where he ended up on the island of Calypso. And that was my justification for allowing Odysseus to find his own story.
And I remember the English students came, and there was quite the controversy there. You raised quite a debate.
The classic literature students, they had an issue. But it was a wonderful, wonderful debate and a wonderful conversation. And the first line of the piece is, a blank page. And that's what the author says. And he starts to create a story out of characters and creating his poem.
And Josh Scott, who's directing this at Dixie High School, was also your scene designer for this and your lighting designer.
Absolutely.
And he decided to teach it to his students. And these young high school kids, they're 16 years old, taking on this text.
being introduced. And I had the honor of going in and talking to them a little bit as they were preparing it. And I did have to make it clear, look, taking the story that I'm presenting as Homer's Odyssey is kind of like taking your historical fact from Shakespeare. Not a good idea when it comes down to it. Shakespeare, of course, he messed with history. I messed with the words of Odysseus, but I am taking, or of Homer, I am taking responsibility for that. But of course, it ends with the author presenting to the audience a blank page and saying, a blank page, the story is yours. And that's, I think, what the whole point of the arts, or I should say the question, what is the point of the arts if they don't provoke more thought and someone else to tell their story? And one of my favorite ways to promote the Odyssey is saying our Odyssey, and the hour in parentheses, and putting just a Y right before the parentheses, so it's your Odyssey.
Well, and I know that the reaction of a lot of these students at the time, they thought, the Odyssey? What kind of show is this? And they wanted to do this big musical or some, a play that they've heard of before. This was all new to them. Can you believe that? And so Josh has opened the door up for these high school kids to delve into the classics. And I think that's a great opportunity for these students. And that's at Dixie High School this Thursday.
Right, so check that out. That'll be Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and next Monday. Now, Josh is a very busy individual.
Yes, he's also directed Chicago at the Electric Theater, and I heard that has actually been selling out this past weekend. So that's doing very well. And that's full of community actors who are very good on their toes. And we had a few professionals that had joined them. And I've heard that it's been selling out. It's doing very well in this area. So that's great.
And the pictures I've seen, I have not seen the production yet. And of course, it is a very well-known musical. You're gonna know a lot of the melodies, all that jazz. Of course, you're going to know that. But the pictures I've seen have been absolutely spectacular.
And then we have it here at our Eccles in our black box. We are doing Rumors, and that is with our theater students here at Dixie State University.
A little bit on the lighter side of life.
Side, yes. And that's
Neil
more of an
Simon.
Intimate setting in the black box theater. It's limited seating.
Right.
But they get to be right up in front, close to the actors. So.
And right across from the black box, of course, the Sears Gallery is now opened.
Yes.
The Sears Invitational. There are a lot of fantastic pieces of art. Come in and check it out. It's wonderful. It is free to the public at this point. And you're going to see a lot of great, great stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say that as my opening segue into our conversation with our guest here in the studio, we've actually covered a lot of it with the Odyssey. I've always been fascinated by people's ability to take ideas and express them on paper. It seems like such an elementary thing, but it's amazing to me the level of craft and skill and attention that it takes to give good quality stuff. I remember I received a typewriter for Christmas when I was 12 years old, and I thought, this is amazing.
A
typewriter. I know a lot of people will think, well, that's kind of nerdy, that was a great gift for you, but you know what? It was. And I sat down to write my great American novel, and I still remember it was a science fiction epic, and it was about the Clibans, the C-L-I-B-A-N-S. If there's an author who's stolen that, then you and I need to chat. But the Clibans, and they were these mushroom people on this other alien planet.
People.
Yeah, I was an interesting little child.
Yes.
And these mushroom people and how they had to leave their planet because their planet was rotting, and how do mushrooms travel across the universe? It was brilliant at the time.
Sounds
I
brilliant.
have to tell you. But I stopped after about a whopping 33 pages. I remember I got 33 pages done because I got tired of all the work it was taking.
Yeah.
And trying to keep track of everything that I needed to write, trying to keep track of this story. And it really bothered me that I had the story in my mind that I wanted to write, but these stupid characters that I had created kept going other directions, and it was really bothering me. So I gave it up. That is my segue. Now,
and the mushroom story never came to be.
Absolutely. The Clibans they're just this race of things in limbo. But that brings me to somebody that I very highly respect, who is on our faculty here at Dixie State University in the English department, Dr. Stephen Armstrong. Welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
That's it.
I get to do the honors of introducing our guest today. Are you ready for this? Okay. I want you smiling while I introduce you.
Let me interrupt. My head is just exploding. You're going to have to start wiping it off the ceiling here. Because Not that I'm a reactionary or anything. I think that anytime you go to a play, you can interpret it. That's the role of the director and the producer. And so while I was squirming here and grimacing, it's just because I'm going through changes. With your ideas.
Oh, that's exciting.
They're splendid.
And by the way, if you want to see these changes and this squirming on Dr. Armstrong's face, you can check us out for video feed. We are streaming live on YouTube, and that will be archived, of course. You can check into YouTube on the Arch with Michael and Christina.
And you can see my hand right there, but where am I on that little video?
Let me turn the camera.
Yeah,
so
what is this about? Okay, yeah.
There we go.
Well, now your face is half off.
They can see my ear. I'm the opposite of Van Gogh, and I'm just the ear. And also, you can see us streaming live on Facebook, Radio St. George. That's Radio space ST space George. And that as well will be archived. So check it out if you want to see video.
Yes, and if you're sitting in your office right now eating a granola bar and watching us, hello, yes. So our guest today is Stephen Armstrong, and those of you who go to Dixie State University would know him very well. I'm correct. Right?
I'm hoping.
Yeah, they better. Yeah. Stephen Armstrong grew up in Annapolis, Maryland. His interest in film history materialized when he was an undergraduate at the University of Maryland, thanks to a professor who frequently screened vintage movies for students. Following a stint as a chef in Baltimore, Armstrong was admitted into the Graduate Creative Writing Program at Florida State University in Tallahassee. He earned his PhD in English from FSU in 2004. Throughout graduate school, he published articles and reviews about the cinema in numerous publications, including Film Score Monthly and Film Quarterly. Armstrong's creative writing has appeared in the American Writing, and I'm going to pronounce this correctly, Ibbotson St. Press, and the Criminal Class Press. Armstrong is the director of an award-winning documentary titled Return to Little Hollywood, which was done in 2009, which chronicles the history of motion picture production in southern Utah. And that's just a brief summary of what he's done. I mean, look at all that.
Well, I have to tell you, there's some things that stand out to me initially from this. The fact that you grew up in Annapolis, Maryland. Another coastal guy. I love this.
Friends.
Yeah, being here in Utah, I have to say, I miss the real bodies of water. When I was up at Weber State University, I was doing Utah musical theater. And it was my first time going to Utah. And I had a bunch of friends who said, yeah, we're going to the beach. And I have to admit, I was a little skeptical. My eyebrow went up and I said, what beach? And they took me to this thing that they called a reservoir. And I'm sorry, that was not a beach.
Not
so
a beach.
I do miss the water.
Too.
But also,
I just remember that urge when we first moved here 12 years ago and we were going to go to one of the reservoirs here because we wanted to get to the beach. We'd been at Michigan on the shores of Lake Michigan for a while and got here and there were diapers and what's it, dental floss and
those dental picks, they're all over.
Dog poop on the beach. And said, this is not where we want to swim.
No,
I actually wrote a letter to the editor about that.
Good
that
for
was my
you.
first publication in the local press. So.
That was your first introduction to this.
Yeah.
Well, and as well, we are certainly going to get into your writing and publication. This is an opportunity that I relish about this show of getting to know our guests.
Yeah.
You were a chef. I mean, we're talking the culinary arts, but tell me about this.
It's a bit my I guess you'd say my origin story. I wasn't much of a student in high school, but when I got to college, the miracle, I got into the University of Maryland and I started writing fiction. And after I graduated, I wanted to go down to the Keys, follow the path of my hero at that point, Ernest Hemingway, and my car broke down in Fort Lauderdale. And that started, I said, I guess this is where I'm supposed to be. And I wound up working in a highway diner for a while, and I was writing in the afternoon and working in restaurants in the early morning. And I often tell my students I would wait tables at the Denny's in the morning and then ride my bike to the other Denny's and write stories all afternoon. I was not ready to go to school. I was ready to have some adventure. Yet I was not making any money waiting tables. And I came back home and thought about it, working in a restaurant, talked to some cooks, and they mentioned a program in Baltimore, chef program, culinary arts program, professional cooking. And I had an epiphany of sorts that I could blend the creative part of my personality with the professional part, and just all day long create things and you know get that part of myself out there, and be able to pay the rent, and it sort of worked. In that I wound up in a French restaurant, but I was making minimum wage and going to culinary school at night, and it was exciting, but it was also like working on a pirate ship. And every time I went to another restaurant, there would be the same crew. And I suppose these people informed my writing and my worldview. You know, you'd be hanging out with someone, talking, and then the next day they'd be in jail. And so you know, then they might come back and find out what happened, and you didn't want to talk to that person anymore.
No, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, and so these violent characters and dope fiends and drunks and all that were working in the kitchen, they've actually wound up in my stories to a certain extent, the ones I've written since. But for me personally, I couldn't do that anymore. And I really, really hated the irregularity of the hours. And I hated working at night. And maybe, you know, there were special nights when we would clean the vents.
Yeah.
And so you'd do an 8-hour shift and then 2 hours of taking apart stoves and scrubbing them with chemicals and burning our lungs out and that sort of thing. So I said, you know what, I'm going to maybe keep the restaurant thing going, but I'm also going to try to start to build my profile as a teacher, because I see myself as a writer ultimately. I found that when I was in culinary school, what I liked to do best was not to pan fry fish, but to write about pan frying fish.
About it.
Yeah, really. I remember writing about how butter works, you know, and I had my eye more toward the gourmet and Bon Appetit magazines and maybe pitch articles to them. And what happened is I just said, you know what, actually what I am is just through and through English person, English major, English language and literature. And I wound up at the University of Baltimore as a professional publications design program, and wound up in a magazine writing course with a person named Rob Canigal. And I said, this is the way to go, but not here, not Baltimore. And I started you know, this predilection toward the South and also coastal living and so forth. I wanted to go south. Let me back up. With one of my plans of going to graduate school was that I would possibly get a job in New York City as a cook. And that didn't happen. And then I had to look at the reality that if I can't even afford to live in Baltimore, then I better go south because it's cheaper down there. And one of the servers at the restaurant where I was working at that point said, you should try Tallahassee. It's a pretty town. And I took all the stories that I'd written when I was the Denny's waiter, when I would leave the Denny's to go to the Denny's to write, and polished them and got into the program there, and was very happy with what happened, and got an assistantship and sort of made my career, and put in those years as you know how it goes with graduate school, and that's it. That's the cooking experience. But, you know, I oftentimes talk about, in my instruction, I talk about the importance of mise en place, everything in its place, and discipline, and regular work. Regular work, you get better. And so when I was a cook in the French restaurant, my nickname was Nick, because of all the times I would cut my hands open. And I mean, there's stories in that. There's stories in it. You know, paring a potato, and the knife goes into the palm, and you look at you and you say, "There's something kind of pink-white coming out of my hand right here." And then you tell the boss, and they didn't want to do workman's comp.
Right, yeah.
Right.
So the cure was to just tie my hand up really tight, you know, and hope it gets better. And I remember that night coming home and unbinding the tape, and the squirting of the blood just coming out. So I had to walk to the hospital. And I didn't have any money, so when it came time to take the stitches out, I just used the little scissors in my teeth.
No.
That's what cooking in Baltimore was about, and that's why I left it. But I passed that stuff on to the students. And the characters I met, there was a lady named Olga who was from the Hollandtown neighborhood. And this is like the Denny's show. Olga was going to culinary school so that she could get a job at a Denny's. She wanted to be a Denny's cook, and I just thought, why don't you just become a Denny's cook and watch the videos they show the new hires, you know? And yet Olga was very, very helpful for me, because she said, "Hon, you know how you make a salad that you can make money on? You take a plate, you take lettuce, you put the dressing on it. You've gone from a 65-cent plate of lettuce to a $2 salad, and then you put the frou-frou. And I said, oh, hon, what's frou-frou? Frou-frou is your pine nuts, your gorgonzola, your albacore tuna, your cherry tomatoes, your salmon. You put all that on there, and you've got a $17 meal. And this is how I explain how to write today. You take your subject, you take your predicate, you take your object, and you put the frou-frou in between, and then you have a nice sentence. And so the culinary life, while I left it, and I'm not much of a cook anymore, it informed my teaching considerably in my own writing with that discipline. I put in 4 or 5 hours today. You know where? In the Harmon's cafeteria, all the vapors from the restaurant, and I mean the food production, and I guess that's still somewhat my element where I'm comfortable, and it was just banging out something, a personal essay. So, okay.
Nice. Nice.
Well, how do you mentioned that you started writing down your stories about things that were happening to you while you were in culinary
Denny's,
school and at Denny's and such. Why do you write? You mentioned that you do it all the time and that makes you better, but why? Why put this stuff on paper?
I think it's because I'm a failed punk rocker.
What?
When I was a teenager, I've been listening to what was on the top 40, Foreigner, Olivia Newton-John.
You're talking our language right now,
Yeah,
just
we're
so
right
you know.
there in your element.
And then I guess I heard the Ramones, or I heard Lou Reed or something, and I couldn't play the guitar. I can't carry a tune, and I don't have an ear. I would just spend hours trying to tune this electric guitar that I had. I could play Wild Thing on it, and that was about it. And I just, I started reading the criticism all the time. I had this stack of Rolling Stone and Spin magazines in my house, and it was my dream to be a Legs McNeil or a Kurt Loder or something. And just kept at it. And then, as I mentioned, I was really stumbling through high school. I had this, as the young punk rocker, a skateboard kid, it was the totalitarian environment, and the only recourse was writing. That was resistance, if you will. And I read The Great Gatsby and said, yeah, this is the direction to go. And got into college and just found that the more I read the poetry, whether it was Yeats or Flannery O'Connor, Hemingway, Eudora Welty, I would just absorb it. I'm an Americanist, so I would just absorb it and try to apply it myself. And, you start out with poetry, and it was very helpful that a professor came up to me and said, "You've got some talent here." And so that's one thing that I do now, is that when I see, I'm always trying to encourage people to tap their latent creativity. But when someone really stands out, I say you should nurture this. You should work on this a little bit more, because it happened to me. And again, I have a job and that I'm happy with, and some people don't. So it's a real blessing to have that kind of mentorship for a young writer. But it's a compulsion, and sometimes I tell people it's a way for me to kind of manage my nerves a little bit better, because I start feeling really kind of like out of shape when I'm not writing every day. That's how I felt in culinary school. When I was trying to be a cook, at one point toward the end of that experience as a cook, I was freelancing for a weekly paper in Annapolis, and they basically let me pick my topic, and so I would go down to the National Gallery and write about Degas, and it would wind up in the paper. Hey, this is a great thing, But then I would go and I'd be at the pizza restaurant at night, working until 2 o'clock in the morning, and that bifurcated creative and non-creative life was really, really tough on me. And so the whole goal was to bring not simply the income to the creativity, but the income to the writing. And I found that in graduate school, and I found that here too. But it's probably an expression of some deep neuroses and related to teen angst,
right?
and
that's okay. Yeah.
Well, that's right. You mentioned that writing was kind of your escape, your rebellion, if you will, to the totalitarian mindset of school, I guess.
And I'm speaking hyperbolically. It wasn't a terrible place. It was just I was a terrible teenager. It was.
Well, that's right. I have to say my own eyes were opened. It was in undergrad, and of course I mentioned how I did not want to be a writer after I realized it took work. I had other avenues of expression and such that I wanted to do. I know. But there was a friend of mine in undergrad named Andrew Zawacki, and he's actually doing quite well for himself now. But when I met him, he was a freshman, as was I, and I asked him what he did, and he said, "Well, I'm a writer." And all I had at that point was the notion that you either wrote stories or you wrote for the newspaper. And I said, oh, you know, what do you write? I'd love to read some of your stuff. And he got very thoughtful. And he just said, well, it's not necessarily entertaining writing. I write about a boy and his dad playing basketball. I'll never forget that. I write about what I saw when I came, home through the path of trees. And that stuck with me. I just got to thinking, why would you write about all that stuff? And then I started to really question it and really start to appreciate this expression of ideas and such. And I have to admit, I was very ignorant to writing and still am on a lot of levels. So you mentioned that you do still write, spend a few hours at the Harmon's Cafe and things of that sort. What do you write?
Excuse me. It might be a better question. What don't I write these days? Because I'm still working away at fiction and storytelling, but also I'm under contract for a book right now on Roger Corman. It's an oral history of his independent film production company in the 70s, and it's transcription of interviews, but it's also preparing notes and a sort of master introduction that will help people to get through this scholarly volume. But to transcribe and write scholarly notes is deadening for someone who has a sort of wild Dionysian personality, as I do. And so I find, to get rid of this sort of stuff in me, I actually have a radio show here at Dixie State, and I write the script each week. My wife and I. It's a wonderful thing to do, isn't it? To have a radio show with your spouse. But
I get to see her once a week.
Yeah, that's our time together. 1 hour together. Yeah.
If we bring in some snacks, we're having a meal together.
It's a date,
So Katie, my beloved, and I, we'll come up with a concept. Like this week's show is going to be Blondie and Beyond. Again, that goes back to that teenage frustration with the punk rock. And so, what does that mean? Blondie and Beyond. And I'll go and I'll scour audio files, and I have the classic Blondie, Debbie Harry stuff, and then Chris Stein when he was a producer working with Iggy Pop, and then Jewel because she has blonde hair, that kind of thing, and weaving it all together, and then work out a script. And that's me practicing my dialogue, because unlike you, we're fearful of spontaneous talk. We script everything, and then of course we have to rehearse right during the show. And
they should probably call our show "They Won't Shut Up."
Yeah, we just blab.
No, you're good. You're good, and you're gold rather. And so that's something that I continue to do. And then there's a book series. It's called 33 1/3, and it doesn't seem to be taking new authors anymore. But they formerly this little line of publishing would take monographs on specific albums, like Abbey Road or something, and Highway 61 Revisited. The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, and I thought I would like to do that. I would like to do that about, say, Lou Reed's Street Hassle, but I need to have samples, and all my samples are really old, and they're mostly reviews. So if I'm writing a book about an album and there's a lot of emphasis on the first person take, I better turn myself into an essayist about rock and roll. And Rhiannon Bent, who heads this is the faculty advisor for the Dixie Sun News, is a friend of mine. And I approached her. I said, Rhiannon, can I possibly do a biweekly column for the paper? And she said, yeah. Oh no, she didn't say yes because she's not the decider. Oh. She gave it to her student editor, the editor who's a student at Dixie State, Rhiannon. And Rhiannon and I went back and forth. What's the concept? What's the name of the title? And I was like, is it goofy that a faculty is writing for the school newspaper and all this? And we finally came up with the topic. The name of the column would be "You Can't Stop Rock and Roll," which is an old Twisted Sister song. And so
I think we both knew that. We were both giddy for a second.
Yeah, and my kid loves Kiss, right? She's my 5-year-old is
your 5-year-old.
She's a nut about sort of glam metal hair stuff and
clowns gone wrong.
Yeah.
I want to meet your 5-year-old.
She's very dynamic, and her nickname is Smooch when Kiss, and so. you know, Smoochie oftentimes gets into these stories that I write, and my poor parents do too, because there's a lot of material right there. And so I use the rock and roll. I started out by doing like straight up reviews of like Actung Baby by U2 and Brian Wilson's first solo record, and I kind of got bored of writing in depth about the chord progressions and that sort of thing, and just started moving more in the direction of E.B. White with One Man's Meat and his collected essays, the New Yorker columnist, and sort of use the song or the album or the band as a starting point to get into other areas, and it's been a real delight. It's been taxing because, again, I'm working on this book with, the Roger Corman New World Pictures book, and I do some pro bono consulting for books as well, and then I'm teaching a quite heavy load, and it's all writing, so it's just writing and writing and writing and writing and writing all the time. But I probably the bright spot in my existence right now is this column for the Dixie Sun News, and it's really wonderful to work with the students on these things too. There are a couple editors, and we go back and forth, and I defer to the editorial calls of the editors, because they're the bosses, and this is a privilege for me. So.
Well, that's right. You actually have several publications as well. And, certainly there are all sorts of kinds of publications, but you've got a few books out there. What are the main topics of those?
Well, the 4 books that I've published that are, in print with covers on them, one was about John Frankenheimer, who's famous for movies like 7 Days in May and The Manchurian Candidate and Birdman of Alcatraz. And then I did that film afterwards. I was looking for a new project. I had done the history of motion picture production in southern Utah with a particular focus on Kanab. And I heard allegedly that Andrew V. McLaglen, who was a TV director and had worked for John Ford. His father was Victor McLaglen, who was the famous character actor who won the Academy Award for The Informer, that Andy McLaglen had worked down here in southern Utah. And so I called him up. He lived in the San Juan Islands. I found his number, and he said, I'd like to help you, but I have no recollections of working on anything down in southern Utah. Well, it turned out that he'd worked more likely in Page on Lake Powell and the Glen Canyon. And so after I finished the film and was looking for a new project, then I called up Andrew again. And his best-known movie may be Shenandoah with Jimmy Stewart. And he had done a fantastic movie with Roger Moore called Folks, which was, toward the end of his career, he was an independent, and he was just taking jobs that he could get. But he made several movies with John Wayne as well, including McClintock and Hellfighters and Chisholm. And so Andrew and I started interviewing Andrew, and then I went to my publisher and I said, look, here's this guy who directed more episodes of Gunsmoke and Half's Gun Will Travel than anybody else. He's foundational in terms of the modern Western, and he did all these films with John Wayne, and he's forgotten, but he's still alive, and he's a pretty vibrant guy. How does that sound? And they said, yeah, go for that. So I did a book on Andrew V. McLaglen, which has actually turned into, it's given me quite a lot of capital in the Western film historian community. And, they said, oh, that's the guy who wrote the book about Andy McLaglen. Big A, they called him, because he was 6'8".
Oh.
And he had his most famous contribution before he became director himself was working on The Quiet Man. And Andrew invited me up to his house in San Juan, on the San Juan Islands in Friday Harbor. And I got some professional development funding for that, flew up, rented a car, drove to Anacortes, took the ferry, and here I am on this little island that's as green. I'm severely colorblind, but it's as green as the famous Quiet Man movie with Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne. And I said, I guess I know why this guy lives here. And I drive and went into his house, and we became fairly good friends, really, the last 4 or 5 years of his life. And I did this book on him. And then following that, I needed a new project, so I hashed together interviews that John Frankenheimer had done, which I supplemented with some original essays, and then went on to the book that matters most to me, and that's a biography of Paul Bartel. Paul Bartel was a New York-based filmmaker who had been quite experimental, working with Brian De Palma at the early stages of his career, knew Martin Scorsese and Jonathan Kaplan, and wound up in Hollywood working for Roger Corman's notoriously frugal independent film production company, New World Pictures. And so I started talking to Roger Corman and Joe Dante and Alan Arkush. Alan Arkush had directed Rock and Roll High School, which was so pivotal in my transformation from a sort of model student, all-American type to a Glenn Danzig bangs guy with Chuck Taylors and all that. And so I here I was working on Paul Bartel. Paul Bartel would go on to direct Eating Raoul, but for Roger Corman, he made Death Race 2000, which notoriously is Maxim's #1 all-time B picture, Maxim magazines. And so I
don't remember voting on that, but I just thought it was fun.
and so I'm in Brentwood talking to Roger Corman and his assistants and his wife and it was a total amazing thrill to get into all this, and I sort of became an expert on the topic of New World Pictures. That led to the current book, which is not fun. Transcription is just not fun, and which has entailed a lot of chasing software that can adapt audio recordings and turn them into text so that I can edit that. But it's not the same creative thing that I get when I'm writing about writing my column.
I have to say, one of the things that I'm missing here is we've talked about your culinary experience. We've talked about writing in Denny's and in the Harmon's Cafe, and also the fact that you're teaching here. But where did the interest in film start? I mean, you've gone into, I would say, quite impressive depths with specific people and specific figures in film. Where did that come from?
Well, you want me to pinpoint this?
Yeah.
Because I can. I mean, I can pinpoint cartoons fairly easily. That's Berkeley, California, and falling asleep to Hanna-Barbera cartoons in the afternoon. But
and please tell me you knew H.R. Puffin stuff. It wasn't
sure,
okay.
Sure,
Good.
Sure. And the Bugaloos. And,
We can be friends.
Yeah.
All right.
This is why we are friends. My parents had gone out for a meal, and in Annapolis, because of these great restaurants. I think they were going out with the Mundys, a family family friends, and left alone. And my sister was not in the house, and there was a UHF channel 20, and they would show movies. And I saw Casablanca, and I just thought, that's great, that's great. And then I think they were war-themed films. That was the week, because it was 2 nights in a row that I'm sitting on the couch in the ground floor of the house, and I'm watching these old movies. And the second one was MASH, and MASH is what did it, because I had always seen the shows, and I thought, I liked it somewhat. I liked Alan Alda a lot, but I liked BJ, but I didn't like the first one, Trapper John. And I didn't like Hot Lips Houlihan until I saw MASH and saw Sally Kellerman in there, and I'm like, and I'm this 10-year-old, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and we went to church a lot, and I see the Last Supper scene when it's a mockery of that, a send-up of that, and I'm really thinking that, why didn't Donald Sutherland and Elliot Gould get the roles on the TV show? This is just fabulous, and it's so in your face and confrontational. And
I think Radar was the only one that went from the movie to the show.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I just, that song too, that brings on many changes, if you know.
Right.
Which I have on my iTunes, actually. And so, and that was it. And I never stopped. And I'd see movies like Superman 2, and I realized now that it wasn't so much the movie. It was, and the guy's name from Swing in London, the guy who played General Zod in the films. It just helped me. The English actor who's so handsome and.
Lots of handsome English actors out there.
I just can't remember who it was General Zod, but that was the thing. And then Fritz the Cat, somehow I got a copy of that. And then my father allowed us to have cable TV for a couple months or so. And then he got frustrated with the cable man and cut it. But during those months, now I was in the basement, and I'm watching Rock and Roll High School and Eating Raoul, one of the movies I would eventually write about. And it was just this sort of compliment to the music that I was listening to. I tended to listen to Lou Reed. It was very cinematic type storyteller. You listen to Berlin. It's a movie set to chamber music, and then so the music and every Ramones song, especially the early Ramones songs. Terrence, isn't that his name?
I'm trying to find it right here. Look it up, yeah.
General Zod, Superman 2. It's
Superman 2. Let me type that in.
But anyway, I mean, this is.
Yeah, it's going to drive me crazy.
Kind of losing myself here, but
okay.
but the
Terrence Stamp.
Yeah, Terrence Stamp. How could I forget Terrence Stamp?
There we go.
So I think I like
Thank
that
you,
movie
Google.
because of Terrence Stamp, and I'm 12, and then the whole Fritz the Cat thing. I don't how I saw that. I don't know. And
I just think of the clock on the wall.
Yeah. But with Ralph Bakshi's thing, and so it was just movies and punk rock and athletics. That's what happened. I used to walk around with a Letterman's jacket with the Kiss Army patch on the
who
sewn
didn't?
into
Right.
Yeah. So, and my mother, my poor mother, she sewed a Clash patch into some raincoat, that trench coat thing that my dad had passed on to me, and it was just kind of like I was starting to, by going punk rock, I was making my own life in a story that was perhaps more interesting than it actually was.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah.
That's right. I have to ask you. Do you remember Captain 20?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's you're bringing back my childhood here.
Yeah.
With Captain 20 and Sigmund the Sea Monster is what my brother and I would always watch after school on Channel 20.
Oh, I had never seen that one.
Captain 20. I look back now and the guy was dressed 1970s, and I'm not talking cool 1970s.
Yeah.
Remember he had that mustache and the
had
strange racer shirt. And,
Yeah.
gosh, I'm sorry, you're just taking me nostalgically back to growing up with my brother here.
And then WBFF had Captain Chesapeake.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember they had
Watching the Munsters.
They had it was a game show kind of thing where you could send in your name and your address, and Captain 20 would spin the big wheel.
I've
and
never
it would,
seen this.
Oh, it was great. And one day he would announce the name that came out of the wheel. And one day, my last name is Harding. My brother's name is Christopher Todd Harding. And I kid you not, he pulled it out, and we would watch every day at 4:05, the commercial break for Sigmund the Sea Monster. And he spun the wheel, and he pulled the name out, and he said, well, looks like we have a Christopher Todd Harwood. Oh. And I will never forget, both my brother and I just fell on the carpet, and it was a really bad shag carpet. We were coming out of a bad time in the country. And we just laid there almost weeping because, and I don't know why I'm sharing this story. I got to tell you.
We all know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he seemed to be flying in a spaceship of some sort.
Oh yeah, and he had all those
never-
friends, the little Captain 20
How did
friends.
I miss this?
Well, I think it was an
We're
East
the
Coast
same
thing.
age.
Yeah,
Oh, was
but
it an East Coast thing?
20 was
okay.
it was a Washington D.C., Maryland, Virginia
That's
station.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha. I'm sorry, I totally
missed all
got
this
off track
joy.
there.
That's all right.
Oh, I love kitsch. That's what kitsch and camp. That's what this was about for me in my late 40s here. So, yeah.
That's us too. Well, you do a lot of writing here. Do you have any publications coming up? I mean, you mentioned the Paul Bartel, and you've got your column. Are you one of these writers? And I say these writers.
These writers.
One of these writers who just has many projects just sitting around ready to go to?
Yeah. What happened is that over this past summer, you know how hot it gets here. I had finished summer school. I was sort of by myself. And I went to a Barnes & Noble, and the only project I had before me was transcription of these interviews for the Roger Corman project. And I just fell into such a sort of state of despondency, not real despondency, not a Star is Born type despondency, but just like, what am I doing here? It's 116 degrees outside. I'm in a boring Barnes & Noble, and I don't want to do transcription. If only I had something else to do. and that's when I started really getting active again. Not that I'd let off. It's just that the Paul Bartel book was done. I was on pure scholarship with this. And again, it's always this ratty little creative impulse in me that drives me, gets me into so much trouble. And so I started inviting lots of work, lots of assignments upon myself. And so I've done about 11 of these columns, which I'm going to bundle together and probably send out to publishers saying, look, I do this, and maybe get some assignments with big magazines, whatever. It's the future, I don't know. But again, today I was just writing for again, what was supposed to be an hour of touch-up became about 4 hours. And I was writing like Hemingway, but I mean standing up in a cafe and just banging away on the little computer and listening to my music, whatever it might be.
Right.
And there I was. So I was going to have my students, I believe, I'm a big adherent to the workshop method. And I have a class that we do that. And it seems like the teacher is always writing on the students' work. Why don't the students ever get to write on the teacher's work? Get some of that reverse, and also benefit having some fresh eyes. But it didn't happen today. If you want, I'm happy to read you something of what I wrote.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes. We've got just a few minutes left in the show, actually. But we would love to hear a sample.
Okay.
In your best radio voice.
All right. This doesn't have a title yet. And
That's
I always
okay.
say begin with the title because that's like the fangs of a rattlesnake.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, this is to my mother. If my mother is listening, this is to you, Mom. I grew up in a subdivision built on top of an old tobacco plantation. Slaves had worked the land where we rode our skateboards and played touch football after school. A wide road bisected the neighborhood, leading on one end to a saltwater creek. Sailboats drifted in circles around anchor buoys down there, and john boats rested on the muddy shore chained to trees. There was a seaplane, too, that had bright orange floats. At the other end of the road, which ran a mile or so, a large white house built during Reconstruction that everybody called the mansion stretched over a partly leveled hill. This had been the residence of the old planters and their descendants. It was a severe but attractive building with carpet-lined staircases, oak railings, plaster ceilings, and chandeliers. One day, the real estate development company that had built the neighborhood informed the homeowners that it was moving the old house down to the creek with plans to turn it into a waterfront property. No one, as far as I know, challenged this decision, and the process of separating the mansion from its foundation and lifting it onto an enormous flatbed truck proceeded a short time later. We were in school the day the movers commenced with the house's relocation. When the bus dropped us off that afternoon, we scrambled home, found our bikes, and sped off in the direction of the creek. We reached the truck, pulling the hoisted mansion quickly. See, that doesn't work quickly because it seems like the truck is moving quickly, but Men with hard hats walked alongside it, communicating with hand gestures through the noise made by the truck's shuddering engine. They waved us forward, and we hovered around the cab, watching the spectacle move inch by inch. Through the bottoms of our sneakers, we could feel the ground quiver. We watched for an hour or so from our bikes. Dusk eventually rolled in, and the day lost its color, making silhouettes of the trees that rose around the subdivision's edges. Then one of the tires blew out, and a blast of air that smelled like hot rubber swept past us. The straining, groaning sound of the engine stopped immediately, and as the door on the driver's side of the cab popped open, a man in a hard hat jumped down. He didn't shut the door. He had been listening to a rock station, and as he walked toward the distressed tire, I could hear Bruce Springsteen's Hungry Heart spill out. Do I have time to finish?
And actually, we do need to start wrapping it up. But how much more do we have?
About 3 paragraphs.
You know what? Let's just do it. We got some time.
Yeah. Okay. I know I'd heard the song before. It was a minor hit back then in 1981. But at that moment, the plaintiveness and the prettiness in Springsteen's voice, especially with him exclaiming, "Don't make no difference what nobody says, ain't nobody like to be alone," made my own heart tremble. I felt an aching to be an adult at that moment, to experience for myself the aloneness the song warned against. As the sun dropped behind the trees and the streetlights came on, the pack of kids on bikes dissipated. The show had stalled, and we had to get home for dinner. I'm sure my sister and I were given cube steak and rice, or shake and bake chicken, or spaghetti with meat sauce, or Kraft dinner, the dishes my parents served us with confounding predictability. My sense of who I was as a person that day had changed, however. The juxtaposition of danger and the gorgeousness of rock and roll had made me aware of death's imminence and freed in me an impulse to pursue what I could from life, to chase what I subsequently started to call the big ideas: love, art, and resistance. My mother and father that night at the dinner table asked us about what had happened with the mansion and worried for us when we told them about the blowout. They had no sense of what was now lying ahead, waiting to spring at them. So that's it.
That was actually gorgeously written. It was gorgeous to listen to, I will tell you.
Oh, you're sweet. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's we certainly do hope that our listeners will look for your name as far as things that you've written in the Dixie Sun. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, it's right there, the student newspaper.
Wonderful.
That's what.
And also check out these books that Stephen has written. Check them out. I'm assuming you're on Amazon and
Yeah, I have my own page actually. They gave it to me without asking.
Oh,
I don't have
Fantastic.
Wikipedia though.
Okay, gotcha. We'll
Not
get
yet.
that
We'll
going.
get that going.
But thank you so much for joining us here. It's been very
Thank
inspiring.
you.
I will say that as I listen to you read, I think to myself, wow, this guy can write. And I know other writers who can write. And, I say to myself, oh, man, if only I could write like that. And it occurs to me that really, if you've got a piece of paper and you got a
do it.
pencil or a pen or even a computer nowadays, these young people with computers, why not write
Do it.
and just see what comes out? And maybe it's not beautiful or with the definition of beautiful right away, but or what the assumptions of beautiful are. But I liked what you said earlier. The more you do it, the better you get. And
Yeah, and if your students are taking your work and putting it into production, something right is going on there. That's that perfect marriage of art and teaching, and so.
I agree,
Congratulations
definitely.
on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's, again, thank you for joining us. Please do remember the Odyssey, which will be opening this Thursday, as well as
Chicago also will be opening, and
Rumors.
Rumors, yes.
Right.
And then this Thursday we will have Kyle Myrick on to talk about his production company out in Hurricane, the Hurricane Valley Theater.
Absolutely.
And he's a student here at Dixie State University.
And a fantastic singer and actor as
Yes,
well. He's a man of all
Full-time
things.
daddy, too.
Right.
Yeah.
So until you hear from us again, that's Thursday at 4 p.m., we hope that you'll keep your focus on the arts.